Ferrari's choice of switching their front suspension layout from pushrod to pull rod was a bold design choice the team made for the SF25, particularly given this being the final year of the current ground effect era. Now, while the aim was to improve the performance ceiling with this change, it wasn't the only reason behind this bold, eye-catching decision. There was an ulterior motive, one which they thought would serve them well in the long term with the upcoming 2026 regulation change. But that isn't looking to be the case anymore, or at least not to the degree they thought it was initially going to be. Let me explain. You see, while the 2026 Formula 1 cars were always intended to remove the majority of the ground effect, the primary source of generating downforce on the current cars via its Venturi tunnels, it wasn't entirely going to be removed. And that's because any aerodynamic surface running close to another surface will still be in ground effect. The pre-2022 cars, for example, generated around half of their overall downforce from the floors and diffuser, for example. So the floors are still and will always be the centerpiece of a car's overall aerodynamics, even in the 26 regulations. But in Ferrari's case, they may have believed that a greater portion was still going to be around with the 26 regulation. Hence the decision to go for a pull rod layout. Now, both pushrod and pull rod front suspensions do have anti-dive in them, and the teams can set them at any percentage they wish to have them at. It's at the team's discretion. But the choice of whether to use push or pull rod front suspension is purely a choice to do with regarding aero, packaging and rate distribution. Because in the current ground effect era, with the Venturi tunnels being the primary downforce generator, there was always problems that arose from these technical regs we are currently in the final year of. We had the phenomenon known as porpoising in the first year, resulting in a floor change for 2023 to combat this particular issue. And from car concepts, there's always been this issue of lift, particularly with the floors and how downforce is generated. That's why we see a lot of the teams basically playing around with the floor edges for the majority of a kind of upgrade package, because making sure the floor edge is at the optimum working window is what is very important, to make sure that lift isn't kind of fluctuating and it's a constant lift. You want a constant level of downforce generated across the board. And this was the reason behind the switch to pull rod. The team of course still aimed to reduce that bouncing in the corners to give a stable platform in terms of balance for their drivers. But it was also a decision chosen in terms of packaging, not only for this year but potentially for next year. So you may wonder, well, what's wrong with that? Everything they've done is perfectly okay and there's no issue with it. Well, what happens if, as it's been happening throughout this whole kind of 26 regulation cycle, the technical regs have been continuously amended? We're in issue 12 now. Now, of course, teams will and do get the updated issues a lot more ahead of us, the public. But what if they've interpreted it wrong and they've gone and thought there's a little bit more of a kind of ground effect happening in 26 than they initially thought? And the whole choice of going to the pull rod was for that reason, to get an initial understanding of it for what would happen next season. And if that's the case, then there's a little bit more of an issue at hand. But of course, this is all me speculating, hypothesizing here. I don't really know what Ferrari are doing, but looking at it from the outside and what people have said on Twitter and whatnot, I'm just making this video because it was an interesting thing to have a think about and take my very limited knowledge and make a video on it. So this isn't something that I state to be fact. It could be far from it, in fact. But let's go with that and say there is a big issue with what they've done. And it means they've wasted a whole year, the final year of this regulation cycle, by going down a development path which is going to be thrown away for next year. And that is quite obviously what could happen, because the floors for next year are very flat. There is no kind of Venturi effect at all, even though there was stated and supposed to be a minimal effect. And downforce is being cut quite dramatically, as well as drag. So if you've calculated things and made decisions and thought we'll do this for this year with a view to next year in terms of a pull rod front suspension layout, then you've got a little bit of an issue on your hands. Not only have you wasted everything for this year and had to completely change the layout of your car, and probably you've created a whole new bunch of issues which they're trying to fix this season, which have become quite public, then everything you learn is not therefore transferable to next season. Now, do I think what they've learned this year with regards to pull rod is not going to be transferable for next year? No, I don't believe that. I think everything you do is a learning process, particularly in Formula One. Even if you make mistakes, you learn from them to not do them the next year, just as you do in life, in your work, your career, everything in general. But with them being the joint or very near quickest car at the end of last season, if they developed that concept with a push rod front suspension, might they not have encountered all the issues they had at the rear and all of the other ones as a result of that? Only they will know. We will never know that. But yeah, it's an interesting kind of position to be in and to think about, because it could be that this is all irrelevant, what we're speaking about or what I'm speaking about in this video, and it has no kind of bearing on what happens next year. But I think there is going to be a slight problem potentially with that. Maybe they would have had a better performance out of the gate sticking with what they knew from last year, which was of course having the push rod instead of the pull rod at the front. But I'm sure they will take the learnings they've gathered in the data and from the drivers and make those changes for next year. And for all we know, they may still end up with a pull rod front suspension, and that is kind of the universal path everyone ends up going down in 2026. But I think what we can expect is there will still be a level of kind of anti-dive in the suspension. That is without a doubt, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere near as important for the way in which you have to set this new 2026 and beyond kind of technical side of things. With regards to the cars, I think it's less important than what we've got this year and since 2022 essentially. And so I think maybe they made a mistake, but I don't know. I could be completely wrong, but yeah, an interesting video and an interesting viewpoint to discuss. I hope you've all enjoyed it, as I'm going to wrap the video up here. If you have, do leave a like on the video. Comment with regards any thoughts with what we've been talking about, me and you, in the video. And I will catch you all across the Spa Grand Prix weekend. And it is a sprint one as well. So Friday there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff happening, as well as Saturday and Sunday. So yeah, hope you've enjoyed your week. And I'll see you all throughout the rest of it.